Giselle Hartwell stood before the cameras with the smile of someone who had already won $180 million, the largest contract in Vantage Auto's history. Nothing was supposed to go wrong that morning, and certainly not because of a maintenance technician in oil-stained coveralls named Logan Hayes. He did not say much. He simply placed a sheet of paper on her desk. Abnormal battery temperatures, cooling system irregularities, fire risk in the fleet about to be deployed. She looked at him, then at the paper. Then she said 4 words the entire floor could hear. No one cares. 5 days, 1 man, and the truth never needed anyone's permission to catch fire. At 5:30 on a Monday morning, the B2 underground garage of Vantage Auto's Chicago headquarters held the particular silence of a space that had not yet decided what kind of day it intended to be. The fluorescent lights buzzed in long pale rows overhead, and the air carried the combined smell of concrete, motor oil, and battery housing still warm from the previous afternoon's charge cycle. And 37 Vantage X3 units from the March manufacturing batch sat in 2 parallel lines along the garage floor. Their white paint gleaming under industrial light, looking as perfect as objects always look before anyone has asked whether they are actually safe. Logan Hayes was already there. He had arrived at 5:15, before the shift supervisor, before the lobby coffee cart warmed up, before anyone who did not have a specific reason to be in B2 would think to come down to B2. Crouched beside Unit C047 with a diagnostic interface cable in one hand and his personal laptop open on the floor beside him, running a sequence that would not appear on the official shift log until 7 o'clock because no one had asked him to come early. He had come because he was that kind of person, and because the systems displayed on his screen were systems he had once helped to design. And people who have designed things do not stop understanding them simply because their job title changes. The numbers that came were not alarming at first glance. Battery module temperature within range, cooling circuit pressure within range, thermal equilibrium index for module C slightly elevated, but not outside the displayed operating band. A different kind of technician would have logged it, noted it as within tolerance, moved on, and been in the break room by 6 o'clock with a cup of bad coffee and no particular weight on his mind. Logan did not move on. He had seen slightly elevated before. 3 years earlier in a test bay in Michigan on a vehicle that had eventually been pulled from a pilot program and quietly redesigned after a thermal event that the internal report described with considerable restraint. And he knew that slightly elevated in a controlled diagnostic environment meant something different when the same vehicle ran continuous high-load cycles under July sun on downtown asphalt. He opened the Vantage X3 technical specification file he had downloaded from the internal engineering portal 2 weeks after joining the maintenance division because he always read the technical documentation for the systems he worked on, regardless of whether reading it was part of his job description, and set it beside the live diagnostic window. He began to compare values 1 column at a time with the methodical patience of someone who understood that the truth in engineering is almost never in the headline number. It is in the relationship between numbers. Logan Hayes had not planned to become a maintenance technician. For 6 years he had been a senior thermal systems engineer at an automotive firm in Michigan, responsible for powertrain validation on electric platforms, the kind of work that required a person to understand failure modes not in the abstract, but in the specific. In the precise gradient between acceptable and dangerous, in the exact temperature at which a lithium cell management circuit could no longer compensate for what it had been asked to compensate for. Then his wife died. It happened quickly in the way that terrible things sometimes happen quickly. For months from the first diagnosis to the end, a period of time so compressed that afterward it had the quality of something dreamed rather than lived. Logan had asked for a transfer to Chicago to be close to his wife's family near his daughter. The Chicago office had no senior engineering positions available. The fleet maintenance division had a vacancy. He had taken it the same day it was offered without negotiating, without asking when an engineering role might open up, without giving the impression that he considered a maintenance position beneath him, because he was not a man who spent energy measuring the distance between what he had and what he might have had. He was a man who showed up at 5:15 and ran diagnostics on vehicles the systems said were fine. He ran the same diagnostic sequence on 4 additional units from the March batch, C031, C042, C049, and C053. 3 of the 4 returned the same slightly elevated thermal equilibrium signature in Module C. The 4th returned a value 2 points higher. Logan sat down on the cold concrete floor back against the wheel housing of C047 and looked at both screens side by side in the buzzing quiet of the underground garage. This was not sensor drift. Sensor drift was random and independent, the kind of variation that showed up differently on every unit. What he was looking at was consistent, appearing at the same location in the battery array under the same diagnostic conditions across vehicles from the same production run. That was a pattern. A pattern had a source. A source meant something had been wrong before these vehicles left the factory, either in the production specification or in the assembly process, or in the validation records that should have caught it before delivery. Logan stood, tucked his laptop under his arm, and walked to the elevator. The launch event was Friday. All 37 units from the March batch were scheduled to run a 3-hour continuous parade through the center of Chicago in front of television cameras, in front of the mayor, in front of the city that had staked its sustainable transit initiative on this contract. He pressed the elevator button and composed the incident report in his head on the way up. He had done nothing wrong yet. He intended to keep it that way. By 8 o'clock Monday morning, Ticket MT2247 had been submitted through Vantage Auto's internal safety management system. Logan had written it with the care of someone who expected it to be read by engineers rather than administrators. Vehicle unit numbers, diagnostic timestamps, Module C temperature readings compared line by line against the AEJ 2464 lithium battery safety standard, a clear explanation of why the pattern differed from sensor calibration artifacts, and a recommendation that all March batch units undergo full independent thermal management review before Friday's deployment. He categorized it as requiring urgent attention, attached the raw data files from his personal diagnostic device, so the numbers could be verified independently, and submitted it before his official shift began. The response came at 10:15, a brief call through the internal line from Jason Mercer's assistant informing Logan that Mr. Mercer would like to see him at 10:30. Logan changed out of his coveralls, took the elevator to the 4th floor, and walked into the office of Vantage Auto's Vice President of Engineering. Mercer's office communicated control through its deliberate orderliness. The sparse desk, the bookshelves arranged by color, the absence of anything that had not been placed with intention. Mercer himself stood at the window when Logan entered, dressed in a charcoal suit, a watch on his left wrist that Logan recognized as the kind that communicated a certain kind of success, and he turned with the warm expression of a man who had decided how the next 15 minutes would proceed before the other person arrived. He did not dispute Logan's numbers. That was the first and most significant thing Logan noticed. A man who believed the data was wrong would have challenged the data. Mercer challenged nothing. Instead, he spoke at some length about firmware generation variances, about normal calibration drift in new battery platforms, about the R&D team's ongoing monitoring protocol for precisely this kind of telemetry signature. He used technical language with the fluency someone who understood it and the precision of someone using it as a wall rather than a window. Logan waited. When Mercer finished, Logan said in the same quiet register he always spoke in, "The elevated pattern does not appear in the January or February batches. It appears across 4 out of 5 units I tested from March. That is not calibration drift. That is a production variable." Mercer's expression did not change. He said pleasantly and with the finality of a decision already made that the scope of a maintenance technician's role was to document and report, not to draw engineering conclusions. He opened the ticket on his screen, typed a brief note, and closed it. Status reviewed within operating parameters, no action required. Signed Jason Mercer, VP Engineering. Logan looked at the screen. He looked at Mercer. He picked up the printed copy of his ticket, folded it once, and put it in his breast pocket. He said nothing. He left. In the elevator going back down, Logan stood with the folded paper and thought not about the dismissal, which he had anticipated, but about the quality of it. How smooth and prepared it had been, how Mercer had met specific findings with a generic counter-narrative that had required no real-time construction because it already existed, which meant the problem was not news to him, which meant the ticket had confirmed something Mercer already knew rather than informing him of something new. From his workbench that afternoon, Logan drafted a second submission addressed directly to the Product Safety Office, bypassing the engineering chain entirely. He attached the same data files. He labeled it urgent. He sent it and then returned to his work with the quiet discipline of someone doing what the process provides for, exhausting the legitimate channels in the order they were designed to be used. But that evening, he sat at his kitchen table and composed a message to Owen Bradley, an independent structural engineer he had known since their second year of university, a man who returned calls the same day and never said something was fine when it was not. With a subject line that read, "Need you to look at something." The last line of the message read, "I may be wrong, but if I am right, Friday is going to be a disaster." Giselle Hartwell did not know Logan Hayes' name before 2 o'clock on Monday afternoon. She was mid-presentation with her operations team on the third floor when her assistant appeared at the door and said, quietly, that a technician from Fleet Maintenance was waiting in the hall and had asked to speak with her directly. She looked at her assistant. She did not ask why a maintenance technician needed to speak with the chief executive. She was the kind of person who believed every question deserved the minimum courtesy of being heard, a quality she had been told more than once was inefficient and had kept anyway. She told the assistant to send him in, and that act of ordinary professional courtesy was the thing she would return to most often in the months that followed, turning it over like a stone to examine what had been underneath it. Logan Hayes walked into the conference room carrying a manila folder and wearing a work shirt with the Vantage Auto logo on the chest pocket. He was not nervous. She noticed this with the attention she gave to everything in a room, because composure in a person who has no institutional power is usually bought with either indifference or certainty, and she wanted to know which one she was looking at. He placed 3 pages on the table, not handed to her, sat down where she could choose whether to look, and spoke for 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Thermal readings, affected units, say safety standard comparison, pattern across the March batch. What the numbers indicated about sustained high-load operation in summer temperatures, specifically in the context of a 3-hour continuous deployment on Friday. He did not editorialize. He did not ask her to feel anything about it. He presented the data the way an engineer presents data, as information that carries its own weight without requiring decoration, and when he finished, he waited in the quiet with his hands at his sides. She reached for the top sheet, and at that precise moment, the conference room door opened and Jason Mercer walked in. He looked at Logan with an expression that did not change, then at Giselle with an expression calibrated entirely for her. Measured, reassuring, already ahead of whatever needed to be resolved. He spoke before she could ask a question. He told her the ticket had been reviewed by engineering that morning, that the readings fell within the adjusted parameters for the new firmware generation, that the technician was recently transferred and still developing familiarity with the Vantage X3 diagnostic profile. He said this without appearing to dismiss Logan. He was too sophisticated for that. Instead, he arranged the information so that Logan's report became a function of inexperience rather than evidence, and Giselle, who had the mayor's office confirmed for Friday and 3 broadcast crews already contracted, and $180 million sitting on a timeline that had not been built to accommodate uncertainty, looked at the pages on the conference table and made the decision she would later identify, without flinching from the precision of it, as the worst professional judgment of her career. She set the pages down. She looked at Logan Hayes across the table and said, not with cruelty, not with contempt, but with the exhausted finality of someone who has too many true things competing for her immediate attention, no one cares about that car, Mr. Hayes, not today. The room went quiet in the particular way of rooms in which something has been said that cannot be unsaid. One of the operations managers looked at his laptop screen. Another looked at the window. Logan Hayes looked at the pages on the table for a moment, his data, his careful work sitting unclaimed on the glass surface, and then he picked them up, folded them once, and placed them in his breast pocket alongside the closed ticket he had been carrying all afternoon. He nodded at Giselle. Not deferentially, not with visible anger, just the nod of a man acknowledging the information he has been given. Then he turned and walked out. In the hallway, Jason Mercer followed him to the elevator, unhurried, and at the elevator doors placed one hand briefly on Logan's shoulder in the manner of a man who uses physical proximity to mark the ends of conversations. He said, "You followed the process. I respect that, but some things are best left to the engineers." Logan looked at the hand on his shoulder, looked at the elevator doors, and said nothing. The doors opened and he stepped in. That night, after his daughter Mia asked him whether he was all right, the simple direct question of a child who reads rooms better than adults give them credit for, Logan crouched down and told her he was working on a hard problem. That was true enough. He straightened, walked to the kitchen table, opened his laptop, finished the message to Owen Bradley, and sent it. Then he sat in the quiet for a long time, thinking about the number 4 and what it meant when 4 out of 5 vehicles from the same batch returned the same signature, and how many intersections a 3-hour parade route passed through on a hot Friday in downtown Chicago. Tuesday arrived with cloud cover and the particular chill of a Chicago spring that had not yet committed to becoming summer. Logan reached the Vantage Auto Fleet entrance at his usual time and touched his badge to the reader. The light did not turn green. He tried again. The reader gave a small flat tone, the kind that means the system recognized the badge and rejected it deliberately. A security officer appeared with a sealed envelope and the careful expression of someone executing a policy they did not write. Inside was a formal suspension notice. 14 days with pay, reason stated as procedural violation of internal reporting protocols and conduct contributing to workplace disruption in advance of a critical public event. The signature at the bottom was Jason Mercer's. Logan stood at the entrance for a moment. Through the glass, he could see 2 colleagues from the morning shift watching from the repair bay. Neither came out. He did not blame them. He put the notice in his breast pocket alongside the folded diagnostic pages, and he walked back to his car and drove northwest across the city to Owen Bradley's workspace in a light industrial building that smelled of drafting paper and machine oil and had a whiteboard the full length of one wall covered in load calculations for a bridge project Owen was consulting on. Owen had been looking at the data since 6 o'clock in the morning. He had the readings pulled up on a large monitor when Logan arrived, cross-referenced against documentation from a battery failure event he had consulted on for a European automaker in 2019. He did not ask about the suspension first. He pointed at the screen first, and after Logan sat down across from him, Owen turned around with the expression that engineers wear when they do not want to be right, but understand that they are, and he said, "This is a thermal runaway precursor signature. I saw this exact pattern before a mass recall in Germany. What you have here is not a calibration artifact, and it is not operator error, and it is not sensor drift." Logan nodded. Owen asked, "What do you want to do with it?" "You have been suspended. You have no legal standing to compel anyone inside that building to act before